Todd Beane, welcome to the Soccer Queens podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
My listeners are really excited for this conversation. I'm really excited as well. And I got the Dutch kit on. Feel it's appropriate for today because I know the Dutch way and Cruyff inspired a lot of your work. So let's get into that. What's been your journey as a player, then as a coach, and what are you up to today?
Yeah, I mean, I had a wonderful upbringing in the United States, specifically up in the Northeast of the United States, New Englander, and grew up multi-sports, playing through college, ended up having a chance to play at the professional level in the United States, and then as I turned the corner into coaching, it was the same thing. Everything from kiddie camps, the summer camps, those first jobs, all the way through, working as assistant in college and having the opportunity to coach professionally. And then a little over 20 years ago now, I came to Spain on invitation from the Cruyff inspired, you mentioned, from Johan Cruyff, to come here and work on projects with him. So as a kid in a candy shop, I packed my bags. I said yes right away. And for 14 years, worked with him before his passing, and then subsequently created a program here in Spain. So it's, for the majority of my life, I've been in the United States, a typical suburban upbringing, which has been fantastic. And then I just flew across to Spain for a project for about a year, and I'm here 22 years later. So plans changed.
Awesome. Now let's talk about TOVO and just how Total Football inspired that. And I don't think a lot of our listeners are familiar with Total Football, which is very shocking. So why don't you get into it?
Well, Johan Cruyff, who, in full disclaimer, became my father-in-law. I married Chantal, and we have 6 children here in Sitges that are his grandchildren. He's passed away now almost 8 years. So I worked with him for 14 years, and he was really the poster child as a player of what they called total football out of the Dutch system. And then he became a remarkable coach here in Barcelona, and really paved the way for so many young coaches in football, that in soccer, that we'll see the Pep Guardiolas, the Artetas, the Jurgen Klopps, and this amazing generation of coaches that we're witnessing in some shape or form will draw their roots to Johan Cruyff. And so we created Tovo as he turned ill and then ended up being terminally ill. I kind of asked for his blessing to take all of these notes and opportunities and ideas that I had scribbled down with him and working with him for so long. And the objective was to try to bring forth an opportunity for players that were not raised in the shadows of Amsterdam or here in Barcelona, and specifically, selfishly, for kids back home, which for me is the United States, and see if I couldn't create both programs and a methodology that might maximize their potential in a way that I just didn't feel like we were doing. But what I felt inspired by, based upon this vision of Johan about what sport could be and what learning could be and what joy could be around the most beautiful game of football.
Now, I know you're going against the status quo and a lot of the old traditions in soccer. What are some things that Tovo's doing differently from a technical and tactical standpoint?
Well, we really our philosophy is that the game in its entirety has holistic demands. And our philosophy is, if that is so, and I think we would all agree, all coaches would agree, that the game has holistic demands on athletes. All I'm trying to do is suggest to people that why not train holistically? And the American market, probably more than any others, is really based upon a paradigm of dividing and isolating and breaking the whole into its parts. In education, I noticed that you have different subjects, and it seems strange to study American history and have literature be divorced from the period or the history in which it was written, right? And so for a long time in the classroom, I would try to piece those back together holistically. And when I got to the training ground, I just tried to do the same. If we know that a child needs to execute skills, but make decisions and read their environment and have the physical prowess to do so, and the emotional stability and courage to do so, why not train in an environment and create a methodology that honors that holistic development and tries to nurture intelligence, skill, and character simultaneously? And to me, it sounds like grandma's common sense, right? But what I found in promoting that methodology, it really runs against the way that many institutions promote the acquisition of skills, or many institutions promote training processes. So we have the same objective, right? We want intelligent, skillful players of great character. Every coach wants that, wants to nurture that in their players. The difference with Tovo is that we've just decided that the paradigm from which would we depart would be a holistic paradigm, not an isolated, divisive paradigm that I have found not to be as fruitful, and that the research suggests is not as fruitful, although it's, as you mentioned, it is quite prevalent.
You're right. A lot of this really is common sense. But when you're trying to inspire coaches with these methods, are you presenting them with some research? Because sometimes I feel people are always like, well, show me the studies. And I
Yeah.
know, I think it was earlier this week, actually, you had a very interesting post on Twitter. Oh, I pulled it up here. And it was a study examining professional matches, and you made a few points that players have about 53 seconds of the match spent in possession of the ball. Players average 2 touches per possession. Now, how is this research helping like get your message out there? Are people receptive to it?
Yeah, I mean, we have what we've done is try to combine two types of research. You have the research from the game itself, the type that you just referenced, yes, and there's the massive amount of research on the physical demands, the psychological demands, the technical demands, the cognitive demands in a match, and then you have the research about child development, how humans learn. What I found is that we often ignore sound pedagogical practices because it's not convenient or it just doesn't fit the way that we've been told to execute our craft. So what I've tried to do at TOE is combine sound research from the match itself. What do players in this sport particularly do? What's demanded of them? The real research. Let's take what really happens in a match. And if we can train in a way that's cognitively faithful, physically faithful, socially, emotionally faithful, as well as technically faithful to that match, my philosophy is that we have a better chance of nurturing the type of player capable of performing well within that environment, or at least maximizing his or her 100% in that environment. And so it's a combination of pedagogical research and good teaching practices and what we've learned through the education sector. Combine that with the neuroscience of learning, and you combine that with this research that you mentioned from the game itself. And if we combine those three and we follow that, I think we'll be better capable of honing our craft and then, by extension, becoming better mentors for the children in our charge. So again, it's a solid research-based approach to maximizing an individual's potential.
That's brilliant. And full disclosure, I've had to unfollow a lot of the standard technical training accounts on Instagram, kind of what Cruyff says. It looks like a circus. But is there a place for that type of training or even just unopposed skills training? And for what age groups, for how long, frequency of training, or should we have a balance of both?
Well, I make a distinction. The short answer is yes, of course, there's a place. Now, where is that place? I would say it's not even age specific. I just saw something, I don't know, it was on Instagram or on Twitter it looked like an 85-year-old man banging the ball against a church or a door or someplace in his neighborhood with his cane. So, I mean, I think just falling in love with the game and the ball and the technical components. Now, the question then becomes, is that the best use of team training time? So I would suggest that there's always time to, as Johan Cruyff would say, make the ball your friend, right? My son is, well, he's out there now banging the ball around and just juggling outside and kicking it around. So is he training? No, he's playing. But is he acquiring skills and having a love for the game and getting some exercise and just messing around? Yes. So for me, isolated technical training is really about players having a relationship with the ball and doing so on their free time or an extra time. Or, I mean, heck, if they have an individual coach and they want to invest that time and energy, why not? There is that time, but that's a coach with an individual. As soon as we get to a team environment, we have maybe 4.5 hours a week. Let's say we train an hour and a half a day times 3 days a week. We have 4.5 hours of team training. For me, that time is best suited to offer the children what those relationships afford, which is training in context, cooperation, and competition. Team trainings for me our limited amount of time where we get to play together, not in isolation, but collectively. And we get to build the skills and build the relationships and build the cognitive prowess and build the emotional stability and the joy that we get from the game by playing with our peers. So, of course, there's a place for individual and training or isolated training. I just don't believe that team training is the best time to do so, if that makes sense. So I won't piss off all of the individual trainers out there, of course, because if they're mentors for children and they provide positive relationships, we need more of that, right? I'm not against it at any shape, in any shape or form. It's just that when I start to talk about holistic training, individual trainers start to think I'm against something. No, I'm just for children having opportunities to nurture the skills that impassion them and to do so with positive mentors in their life. And when we have a chance to be together, why not take advantage of that collective? And the best way to do that is to compete as a team or in small groups or in small-sided games, these types of activities.
I like that. I don't think it's either or, but with that team training, it is best to have efficient use of time. Now, I do get a lot of questions from parents of young ones for skills training. They'll hire a trainer because they say, oh, my kid just hates practicing on their own with the ball. And I always wonder, is that a passion problem with the kid? Do they really want to get out there and practice their skills? What do you think's going on with that?
I think time tells, right? I mean, if it's my child's not good enough, so I want to invest in a private tutor, and the motivation is quite different than, hey, my child wants extra time and they love to be with a caring mentor. Okay, so you see how those motivations are different. One is I'm lacking something and I've got to go out and fix it, and the other one is, hey, my child loves to kick the ball around, but likes to do so with a friend or an adult or a small group of that nature. So I think time tells whether a child really has internal motivation and a true passion for the game. And keep in mind that millions of children are signed up by parents, right? Whether it's for hockey or dance or music or art. I mean, we sign our children up hoping that something will stick, right? Hoping that they'll enjoy karate or taekwondo or whatever it may be. But at some point, it has to be student driven. It has to be driven by the player's passion and the player's interest in improving and the player's, I don't know, engagement with the ball, the game, their peers. And if you don't see that emerge, it's probably an individual motivation issue. You can't really force passion on a player, but you can give them exposure to situations that may impassion them.
I love how you're always talking about the importance of play at those younger ages. And I do usually like to give people a chance on my show to unpack something they tweeted because on Twitter, the character limit is sketchy and there's no room for like nuance and thinking things through, and people just react quickly. So there was one tweet where I think people were like, oh, I don't know about this one, but I do want to give you a chance to explain it. I really liked it. So here we go. February 3rd. Playing a sport was once merely play until something happened on the way to the SAT test, the ACT, the AP, the ECNL, the GA, the GPA, the MLS Next, the ODP, the NCAA, the D1, the ID, the showcase. Wow, so many acronyms there.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the line, play became a burden. Let them play.
What I'm getting at there is I think anybody that is of my generation will understand really what this means, right? Um, I was speaking about this to a colleague today over coffee. When I was young, we went out and played pond hockey, and we played tag, and we played kick the can, and we played soccer, and we played basketball, and any other games that we could possibly think of other than being inside. Right now, I know it's opposite, right? But we didn't have any diversion. We had no reason to be home other than mom telling us to do chores or dad getting us on our homework, right? So we had an environment in which play was play. Play for me was not a pathway to college. It was not a pathway to my future success. It wasn't associated with any pressure of what I would do in my performance. I wasn't identified. I didn't go to showcases to showcase myself so that some suitor could recruit me. We didn't have that. What we had is passion of play, just the inherent joy. And by extension, we learned to become decent athletes. You know why? Because we took the stick, we took the shovel, and we took our skates, and we slung them over our shoulders, and we cleared off the pond, and we played for hours and hours and hours. We all got in trouble for arriving late to dinner, and we went out and played as much as we possibly could. This is unbridled joy. And interestingly, in that environment, we became skillful, we became capable, we became self regulating and self reliant and resilient. All the things that my parents would want for me and I would want for my children. But we did it without the scrutiny, without the spotlight, without the constant expectation, without the constant criticism. What's happened, I think, we have gone from helicopter parents to snowplow parents. I've learned that term recently. And we don't want our children to fail. We want to pave the way in any obstacle, anything that could cause angst or anxiety or give them freedom. We want them to be on a path to success. This is very much a US thing. I can't speak to other countries except for in Spain. It's not. It really isn't. In the US, play dates and performance and tests and pre-tests. So all of these acronyms the kids get bombarded with. Oh, I'm on the MLS next. It's not just the good enough to be in the MLS, it's the MLS next, and with the elite and the Olympic. All of these acronyms applied to children don't always play out in the way that we would want. So, what I wanted to do in that tweet is to say, what happens if we just let children be children? What happens if we just gave them the opportunity and the freedom to play without constant scrutiny, without constant pathway conversations? Play for the sake of building relationships and having fun. And that will instill the passion that will lead to some of us or some of them carrying that further beyond their high school days. And that's okay. And those that find music, art, science, dance, or theater, or any other endeavor that passions them should also have the freedom to explore that. I just think we got a little too serious about what a 6-year-old needs to do now so that they can get into Stanford. Right? It's just, and I know because we work with kids, and I can tell you the pressure is palpable. They feel it, and I don't think they should.
Yeah, it is interesting. I do see even as young as age 8 or 9, there's like pre-ECNL team. And yeah, it's so serious. And I think like your generation and even my generation's the millennials are probably like the last who like grew up with this very playful childhood. And even like looking back to what Cruyff did for an entire country, just changing how soccer was played. And I actually have family in Maastricht and Amsterdam, and I just love seeing all the Cruyff courts, and they're full, they're packed. And then here you drive by just a local middle school or high school field, and no one's playing pickup soccer, and it's
Yeah.
really ruining that cognitive component that you speak of as well.
I'll give you a story. So I took my kids on kind of a summer tour as we were kind of going up the coast before running a TOVO camp in Monterey. So we were driving around and we got to see campuses and meet friends and some TOVO alumni and just enjoy the West Coast, just the boys and I, driving up the coast of California. They could not believe. They're like, there's another field, right? So I'll give you an example. So we're in Santa Cruz, and I'm like, dad trying to say, well, we're in Santa Cruz, so we should go to the Santa Cruz Pier because that's what people do, I guess, in Santa Cruz, or at least tourists do, and I'm a tourist in that case. So I'm like, oh, don't you want to go to the pier? Well, where I parked was about 4 blocks from the pier. They had no interest in going to the pier. They're like, here's a field, and they said, is it open? And I'm like, yeah, there's no gates. It's a turf field and it's empty. They're like, all right. I literally went to, and I'm not kidding, I went to Walmart and I bought them a purple, the only ball that was left was like this purple ball. It was kind of a soccer ball, but more like a beach ball. And they just kicked the ball around for 2 hours. They could not believe that there were these open, empty fields that they had access to and that they could enjoy for hours. Eventually, an alum of Pepperdine came by and she had a bag of balls and they spent another hour. Meanwhile, I went to the pier, I took the photo, saw the seals, had some food and came back and I had to drag them off, right? So I think, I don't know why that's happened, maybe play dates and, kind of agendas that are so full, but I would really love to see more children playing with one another without formal coaching, because I think there you build relationships that are meaningful and give you the stability and security to take on the world with vigor, right? So I really think we've lost something when we take away pure play. I really do. I could be wrong, but it's kind of like my grandma's wisdom, get out of the house and go play with your friends. and good things come from that. So I think it does prejudice a generation when the play is PlayStation and not going out to the playground.
So how do we change that? Because I feel we're kind of in a hole right now.
Unfortunately, I think what's going to happen is, and we're seeing it now, you'll see the pendulum swing back. We've just been bombarded with this thing, and we gave it to our kids, and we suggested that it was greater connectivity. But now we know this is not connectivity. This is disconnection and isolation. So when we know that and we see the profound effects that it's having and it's having now on our children, I think the pendulum will switch back and parents will start telling their children, put this away and go out and play. I hope so, because all the research suggests that this is not connectivity. It's actually disconnecting from the relationships, live face-to-face relationships that we want to have. It's a useful tool, but it can't be the crutch for not engaging with other children or other mentors in your life. And I think that's going to come. I'm hoping that we recognize as parents, as I'm also part of that process, the value of just putting that away and encourage kids to go out and see their friends in the neighborhood or wherever they possibly can. But we have no shortages of parks in suburbia America. And in the cities, as you mentioned, in Amsterdam, they put in over 250 Cruyff courts so that they're safe places for children to play in urban areas. Now, I can't speak to New York and I can't speak to San Francisco as well, so I'll leave that for other experts. But in a lot of America, there are still places to play, but they're vacant because kids are on the PlayStation.
So, in terms of technical training, I think people think it's just the unopposed ball mastery drills, but I like that you say that technical is everything. So, can you just give some examples in terms of like first touch and being ready to make a pass and how technical is more than just the time spent on the ball?
Yeah. So as soon as in the American market you say technical fundamentals in soccer, for example, people will list off five things: passing, receiving, shooting, dribbling, and heading. So I back up and say, are those the only fundamentals to play sport? What about mobility, agility, stability? What about movement in general? What about the cognitive component? What about scanning your environment and making choices? Are those not skills? Are those not fundamental skills? So by defining technical skills as physical execution of a limited portion of the game, we prejudice the development of our players, because from that platform, we make drills. So we make passing drills and shooting drills and heading drills, and we'll do that in isolation, right? But if we expand our definition of technical skills and fundamentals to include scanning and choosing and deciding and assessing the efficacy of your action and interacting with and without the object, the puck, the ball, the basketball, then we start to think about movement. What about mobility, stability, do force, right? And that's we come back to like the old days with climbing trees and being in the park and getting that physical agility. If all of those are skills, and I think we can agree on that, all of those are skills, and our training probably should reflect and embrace all of those skills holistically. That's the idea, right? That's the idea. And I'm lucky to work with movement specialists that agree with me and then incorporate those skills, those movement skills, as part of our training environment. So I just think it's a matter of a very myopic definition of skills. And when we expand that definition, we allow for the entirety of the child and their performance.
Can't help but think of some of these technical training nights at clubs in the United States when there's probably like 30 to 50 kids out on the field and they just go from station to station, like dribbling through cones or working on 1v1 moves. So I'm wondering, are those nights a waste of time? Should we be doing something else while there's so many kids out there and maybe encouraging them to do like a ball mastery program at home and develop that relationship with the ball? I just think sometimes these technical nights are like counterproductive.
Okay. Yeah. You want me to be honest or you want me to placate your audience? I don't know which.
There's so much honesty on the Soccer Queens podcast,
Okay.
so
All right. Here we go. All right. Thanks for that. So let me dig in. And it's not to offend anybody. They're not a waste of time if kids are having fun. That's how I look at it. If the kids are having a blast and there's passion and there's relationships and there's laughter and joy, fantastic. Is it the most effective way to nurture skillful players? No, no research in the world even suggests that. If you have 50 kids, matter of fact, if you have 6 kids, I'd play 3v3, right? If you had 4 kids, I'd play 2v2. If you have 50 kids, I would be playing small-sided games. You want to know how much fun they have when they go home and tell grandma and grandpa how many goals they've scored? They'll come back. Standing in line in the cold to dribble isn't really actually the application of skill and context. So it makes us feel good. It looks good, and all the toys and bells and whistles maybe impress the parents. But if you want to talk about skill night being actually the most effective way to develop skills, the answer is no. If you want to say, is it worth it because the kids are having fun? Awesome. Then yes. But we need to follow skill acquisition and application research if we want to actually be effective educators. So no, if you're thinking the objective is that the best way to take 50 kids on a Wednesday night and have them interact with the sport that they're playing? I would say definitely not. If it works and the kids are having fun and it works in your ecosystem, that's the value. It isn't the most effective way if you think skill night is really skill night. How about a night out of playing with your peers, with mentors to guide you in an amazing environment, which is competitive and cooperative? Ironically, it's in context that skills can be nurtured, especially if you have 50 kids. My gosh, that's an amazing opportunity missed to interact, to compete, and to cooperate in ways that will nurture a child far beyond their ability to kick a ball, in my opinion, obviously. So there you go. I'm not holding back now.
No, I love it. And you're right that fun is number one priority. But I've also seen clubs and coaches start to do technical nights where that cognitive component is involved. And the kids love it. And they'll come to me and be like, we've learned about soccer more in the past month than we have in 5 years. So it's pretty
Yeah.
amazing that when you do these methods, the kids really enjoy learning about the game.
I'll give you an example. So I just got a note from a parent yesterday in Australia, in Auckland, and the boy came here and he came to visit us for January, and we followed our protocol, which is technical protocol, but just not in the traditional sense. It's technical cognitive character development in its holistic form, and we train rondos or position plays and tons of training games. We changed the surface, so we changed the size. We played on the Cruyff court, we played on the patio, we played in the park, we played on the training ground and in a beautiful stadium, right? So here's the interesting thing. When TOVO kids go home, the coach will comment on how much technically better they've become. They're so much more poised. Dad said, oh, he's improved so much technically. Of course, because technique is the application of a skill in context. So if he finds a meter of space and knows what he wants to do with the ball, the perception of his coach in Auckland is that, wow, you did amazing technical training in Spain. Of course he did technical training. He just didn't do technical training in isolation. He just didn't do it in the way that traditionalists want to cram down our throats. It doesn't have to be that way. We can develop technique and skill and the amplified definition of those skills in a much more engaging, competitive, and cooperative way that raises motivation and raises the dynamic energy contributing to a session, and kids will go away wanting more. The myth that I have to isolate a skill to execute a skill doesn't wash. It's not historically relevant, it's not even tactically relevant, and it's not even research-based. Interesting enough, if you take a look at Brazil or you take a look at the streets of Amsterdam that has produced so many brilliant players of past generations, what is it that the favelas of Brazil have? Context. Kids go out and play. They don't go out and stand out there and then do line drills with somebody barking at them. They go out and play. They are some of the most skillful players the world has ever known. And the US's solution to that is, okay, since our kids aren't playing, let's put them in lines and have them dribble around cones. It just doesn't make sense. I take a game in its entirety that nurtures skill in context and the intelligence and the competitive spirit to play the game. And my solution to compensate for the fact that children aren't playing in streets in the United States is to isolate the skill and put them on a cone run. I just don't get it. I'm not talking about what, for example, my good friend Tom Byer may say with younger players, and you're at home and you're in the garage or you're banging the ball around like my son is in the back, or you're just a toddler and you're just goofing around with baseballs and basketballs and footballs and soccer balls. Okay. Then, of course, football and other sports start at home. But the moment I have some friends, we can compete and play 1v1 hoops, or we can play 3v3, or we can go to the pond and play pond hockey, divide and play. I just don't understand the mentality, and nobody's been able to explain it to me, and no one's been able to show me the research that suggests that this sort of holistic training in any way negates the development of skills to be applied in context. In fact, the research suggests the opposite, that by engaging in context, we nurture the abundance of skills required to meet the demands of the performance match. I've asked for it on Twitter. Every year I ask for the research that suggests otherwise. Silence. But the moment you suggest that we could do something other than skill night on Wednesday night, you're going to offend people for political reasons or for monetary reasons or for things that have nothing to do with child development. It is what it is. So we're just going to go forth and bang the drum and say, hey, let's develop the child holistically, completely, and let's maximize the potential. And let us show you some ways in which amazing coaches around the world have and continue to do so. To me, that's exciting. And then you get the movement, then you get the strength, then you get all of the components that are required to compete engaged. And then if those children, as you mentioned, are so impassioned that they want to go on to play at college or beyond, well, then maybe you need to do some supplemental or functional training in areas. Maybe you need to have a team psychologist. Maybe you need to go to the weight room. Maybe you need to do some additional training in function specific, like keepers or wings. That's fine. But at the youngest ages, kids want to play, and play with some mentorship is enough to keep them coming back. And ultimately, what we want is to reduce the dropout rates, because we know what sport does for a society. Child by child, we reduce crime, we reduce suicide, we reduce drug dependency, we reduce all of the ills of society the longer a child stays in the game. Now ask yourself a question. Is going and dribbling on a cone going to do that? Or going to play with your mates going to do that? For me, football is much greater than pro or college. And this is where I agree with Johan Cruyff. It's an opportunity to really take on some social ills and build children capable of living productive and positive lives. That's the benefit of sport. And for the small fraction that get to do so and get paid, fantastic. It's a completely different world at the professional level than it is at 12 years old in Tampa, Florida, on the shores of the beautiful sea, right?
Wow, I can just hear the passion in your voice, and it's just so amazing to just hear how you're coaching the players who come to TOVO camps. And I've had a few girls, Amanda and Gabby, go to your Lake Tahoe camp a few times, and they always come back with that passion and excitement. They do feel they improve technically as well, and their character and their nutrition and their recovery and this holistic picture of a player. And it just pumped me up. And I'm sure people are curious, especially like the coaches listening, like, how do you add to your small sided games? And like, what are some things that you can just kind of guide coaches on to like make sure players are cognitively fast and ready for their first touch? Like, do you tell them to keep their head constantly on a swivel? Like, what are some like rules you have within those games?
Right. So every exercise in a portfolio is a 3C exercise. It's going to nurture cognition, competence, and character. Then we can start to teach the subsets of those. For example, the question you posed is, how do you teach a player to be more aware? Well, it's about architecture, it's about position, and it's about profile. So we teach this TOVO app. The architecture is my position relative to my teammates. My position is, what position within that architecture do I occupy uniquely to support our team? And then the profile. How do I have my head up, my hips open, and take the ball across my body to see both the past where the ball is and the future, the space we want to penetrate? So when we get into the coaching, we make it very simple in the sense that, hey, let's work on that TOVO app. Architecture, position, and profile. Gabby's been there, Amanda's been there, and you mentioned two amazing young women, both of whom are going to take the world by storm as they go to college next year. And I can't be more proud of our kids because they're just amazing young men and women. But if I come back to the details, if Gabby can speak to the details that she learns, then I've done my job. There is no coaching without learning, right? There's no teaching without learning. We focus a lot on teaching and coaching. We should focus more on learning. So if Gabby's walked away with a greater understanding of her relationship on the field and the very detailed tips we've given her to manage oneself, manage the space, and manage the ball, then she's a better player. And I know Gabby is a greater player because she's so dedicated, intelligent, and amazing person, as is Amanda. Amanda has that fire and that grit, and you've worked with her. You must love her working with her as well, because my gosh, you talk about a child with passion. She's going to take this world on with vigor, by for sure. And all we're capable of doing for her as coaches is to take her energy and say, wow, may I give you some tips to this trade we call football? And there are some tips that maybe you have not been exposed to that we can give you. Think about your architecture collectively, your position individually, and your profile and your body angle to bring about the effect you want as you penetrate down the wing and score goals, for example, right? So we get into the details, but the premise is that every exercise in which those details emerge will demand that those details be executed, right? An exercise that does not demand that which I'm teaching is not a very useful drill. And many drills are not that useful if you think about the entirety of the game. So we're very specific in our teaching, but we're specific to the craft of finding and exploiting space. And that's why these exercises and the choice of exercises that we employ is so critically important for coaches. It's either a platform for learning or it's a platform of obedience training and compliance training. We just prefer not to do compliance or obedience training because we don't find it fruitful, but neither do the kids. So I don't have any reason why I would keep it in the portfolio.
I encourage everyone to check out Todd's Twitter account. I'll include all the links in the caption below, and maybe go to one of the TOVO camps. I've had my girls go and they love it and rave about it, and they just come out better players and humans. Now, Todd, we're going to end with just a few fun questions. So, the
Sure.
Euro is this summer. And
Yep.
I arguably like the Euro more than the World Cup. I just feel it's like war. It's like more intense. So,
Yeah.
what are your predictions for who's going to be in the final?
Oh, good question. I think if, interesting enough, I think if England can get their act together, they have to be considered. Have to be considered both on the men's and women's side. In this case, the men's Euros this summer. But I
Mhm.
just feel if they can get that right, they've got so much talent. We've got Bellingham here ripping it up in Madrid, and other players, of course, throughout England and Germany. So I've got to believe England, if they get their act together and they don't get tripped up by penalty kicks again.
They're cursed. They're like cursed
They're
in the
cursed.
finals.
Um, the Dutch, I don't know if the Dutch are ready to go too far in with Ronald Koeman or not. We'll just have to see that emerge. I think the Spanish are always considered to be in the mix just because the quality of play. You look at Rodrigo and what he's doing up in Man City, and you just look at the players around him. I mean, probably the hardest job of a national team coach is to determine which midfielders in Spain are you going to leave home. Right? I mean, it is just I don't think Greg Berhalter has the same challenge, right? It's more like which midfielders are healthy and worth competing at the highest level. In this case, you're right about the Euros, though, because I mean, with all due respect to secondary and tertiary markets and what Qatar just is about maybe to accomplish again in the Asian Cup, Qatar went to the World Cup, and let's just face it, European countries are better. They're more analogous to South American countries, the big giants, than the Brazils and the things. So when you take Europe and you put Europe together, you're basically getting a pretty good swath of the top teams that would be in deep into a tournament on the global scale. So I'm hoping for Spain. My wife is going to make sure that I have a little bit of orange on.
Yeah,
And
definitely orange. But I agree.
just
I
for
don't
my
think they're
English
going to
friends, I,
go
I
that
feel like
far.
I feel like my English friends are so desperate. I feel like maybe time now that they get something done, because otherwise they're going to be just depressed up there in the mist and rain. So we've got to give them something. As much as I hate to admit it, we got to give the English something, right? So to my English friends, I hope you guys make it to the finals.
And maybe on the women's side, to your point. So I know the next women's World Cup is pretty far away, sadly. But what are your predictions for that? And also, what are your thoughts on where the U.S. women's team is going?
You wouldn't have researched 5 years ago my tweets, but 5 years ago I tweeted that Spain was coming and that the United States should not wallow in complacency and they should not wallow in arrogance. And I think that we did, and we were surprised, but I wasn't. The Spanish team, under 17, under 20, and the senior national team all won World Cups. That is not an accident. What I'm seeing here, there is no breadth of the game on the women's side here. I hate to admit it, but the girls' game is just not broad here. It's not like the United States. But I can tell you it's deep and it's profound. The girls that are at Barcelona are training in a way that American girls are not. And you're seeing what that produces. It produces Aitana Bonmate, who, if I point the camera a little bit to the right, you'd see where she lives. The best women's player in the world, coming off the heels of Alexia Putellas, the best women's player prior to Aitana, who wears number 14 as an ambassador for the Cruyff Foundation. So she's our local favorite. What's going to happen? The US is going to be a factor because, okay, you're not going to win every tournament. The women in the United States are amazing athletes. They're incredible competitive athletes. They're not going to win every tournament. And in some ways, you don't want one country to win every tournament because that's not good for the women's game. The fact that Spain has emerged, the fact that Brazil's commitment and Chile's commitment and Italy, and now you start to see Asian countries, and of course the northern countries of England and Sweden and Norway and Germany, all these northern European countries have always been in the game at that level. But it's better for the game that the US lost. I hate to say it because I'm a US fan. I want the US to win. But I can tell you that Spain is playing better football right now than the United States, a more intelligent and a more skillful football for a number of reasons that we've just articulated in this podcast. Having said that, the US is a dominant force. We have enough talent, enough skill, enough intelligence in the game. And if we can piece it together, we're going to be back on top, which is going to be good for the game. But it's also good for the game that Spain is in this picture when 10 years ago, they were not. That's the benefit of the beauty of football, is that once countries come together, we want to see the diversity of the interpretation of the game. Spain's interpretation is working pretty well. And by extension, the training methodologies are working pretty well. And it's Cruyffian based. We can't deny it.
I love that. Now we'll hold you to that, Todd. I'll probably post this podcast in a few years.
Yeah.
We'll be like, okay, maybe he was right. But
Yeah.
this was such a great discussion. I know everyone's going to learn so much. So besides Twitter, is there anywhere else people can find you?
I just think start there. I mean, we have, tovoacademy.com, obviously, is just the website, tovoacademy.com. But really to connect, I leave my DM open, on Twitter or on X now, I guess, on X. Yeah, @_ Todd Beane. And I leave my DM open because, I certainly don't want to suggest in this podcast or any podcast or course that we offer that I have the keys to the kingdom. I don't. I just want to push ideas out there. I want to experiment. I want to play. I want us collectively as coaches working with young children to hone our craft. And we'll never hone our craft if we're not pushing the envelopes of innovation and engaging with one another in a positive way. So, that's, I think, the best place to at least find me. Agree, disagree. I'm from New England, so I can take plenty of criticism. We're thick-skinned. We do have a heart. It's just buried deep under those bitter winters. But just engage. I really, really appreciate you having me on because your podcast, as well as other professionals, you're really doing that. You're amplifying various voices, and we're creating the friction of discussion that allows us the heat of innovation. So I really appreciate you having me on. And as I said, it's not my intention to pretend that I know everything about football. That's not even close to being true. But what I do want to do is ask the right questions so that collectively we can come up with better answers for our children. So thanks for letting me babble a little bit here today.
Of course. It was a pleasure having you on. And I know everyone's going to take a lot away and probably connect with you in the DMs. And I can say that you got back to me instantly. I wasn't sure if you were going to respond, but Todd gets back to you. So he'll stay true to that. So everyone, we hope you enjoyed, and leave a comment if you have any questions or you're going to try any of this out at your club. And I'll see you guys on the next episode.